So not only are we now in watching a real war take place against the people of Palestine in Gaza and the West Bank, but we have a cultural war taking place in the United States, among many different types of issues. But this one here has to be addressed because our government, the government of the United States, is going out of its way to not only fund the war, but also fund an opinion that we need to have about it. On December the 5th, the House of Representatives ruled from a margin of 311 to 14 that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. So, and then they expanded upon this now to also have the same House Education and Workforce Committee to probe into anti-Semitism at the University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, and MIT, and they're going after university presidents. Now, this presentation that I'm doing, I am calling Opposing Genocide, Zionism, and Anti-Semitism at the Same Time. I reject this as many others do, including Jewish friends and allies in the United States and around the world. But I will go into explaining why we reject this and why this is false information. But first of all, before I go into all of that, remember that this decision was made on December 5th, 2023. As of December 9, it's estimated that over 17,000 Palestinian civilians have been slaughtered since October 7th. It is estimated that close to 7,000 children, Palestinian children, have been slaughtered since October 7th by Israel. Okay? The UN says that 85% of Gaza's residents have been displaced. And there has been increased violence, very bold and grotesque violence that Israeli settlers are enacting on Palestinian civilians in the West Bank with the help of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. Now, I shouldn't have to actually even try to explain all this. We can watch footage of this on mainstream media. And if you watch Al Jazeera, as I have, they have reporters that are Palestinians living there, are trying to live there, inside of Gaza as it is constantly bombed. And the destruction is astronomical. This is a genocide. This is amount of mass destruction on a civilian population that the entire world is watching. The entire world is watching what is happening. A targeting of the civilians. And then everybody being told that the real object of this war is Hamas. It hasn't even been made clear how many Hamas members have actually been killed or captured on top of that. But we see the dead children. We can see every night limbs missing, wailing mothers, crying little girls, little boys. If you can watch this footage and not be disturbed, I don't understand where your humanity's at. But in any case, it doesn't bother Congress because this was not a part of the discussion, because the United States government funds all of this and gives all the weapons to and diplomatic support for these attacks on the people of Gaza. The UN wanted to call for a ceasefire to allow for more humanitarian aid, and the US has vetoed it. So apparently, US Congress does not care about slaughtered Palestinian children. It's not their concern. But I will go ahead and address what Congress has actually stated, since that's what they want to talk about. this idea that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, that it's racism against to Jews. So, since I am an anti-Zionist, and I will always be forever against anti-Semitism, I do want to make clear how this is a false statement and why. But let's actually address this weird priority about critiquing anti-Zionism. How many Americans even know what Zionism is? Is there this wave of anti-Zionism? Is there a wave of Zionism? How many Americans, again, even know what that term means? So this is the priority of our Congress to address. Now, the Brookings institution, they did research that they put out in July 18th of 2023, so recently, where they took a poll and they asked questions of Republicans and Democrats, what is your impression of Zionism? Now, for Republicans, 32% were unfamiliar with the term. Democrats, 36% were unfamiliar with the term Zionism. 25% of Republicans said that they don't know, and 28% of Democrats said they don't know. So, obviously, it's not like this is a huge topic for much of the United States, this term, but on college campuses, yes, it shows up more. Well, what is Zionism? Political Zionism is an ideology that emerges specifically out of the 19th century in response to European ideologies and European circumstances. The Israeli scholar who just passed away today, I believe, Shlomo Avnery, who was 90 and wrote extensively on Zionism and Zionist thought, and I've used in some previous videos quite extensively, pointed out that it was not just a response to anti-Semitism, but Zionism was influenced by liberalism and nationalism that was taking place at the time. That Zionism basically is a Jewish nationalist idea for Jews to create their own state. And if you read the primary sources of Zionists like Herzl, if you read proto-Zionists like Moses Hess, if you read the works of the far-right thinker of revisionist Zionism, Jabotinsky, they all also saw Zionism as being a part of a colonial project in the same kind as a European colonial project, because that's what they actually said in their primary sources, and they would need help from a European country to sustain it, and they would push European civilization into the Middle East. And ultimately, this was supposed to be also, on top of that, an answer to anti-Semitism to Jews by having their own state. So that is what Zionism is. The idea of a Jewish state in Palestine, okay? And put in through those, that's the context it came out of. Now, the propaganda lie that the pro-Israeli Zionist camp likes to shove out is that all anti-Zionists want or demand Jews to be expelled from Israel and Palestine, or even worse, all killed. That is an absolute lie. Of course, there are hardliners from the pro-Palestinian side and hardliners from the pro-Israel side that both want worse. But we're not making this proposition didn't make this committee did not make a distinction between various degrees of different ideologies going throughout the Israel-Palestine conflict. So they just simply said anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are the same. And again, what are they trying to say? That anti-Zionism implies that Jews should be expelled or be made subservient or something negative to Jews in the area. Again, this is not true, and I'll explain more about that in just a little bit. But what is Zionism? Zionism doesn't make the argument that simply Jews belong or have a right to exist in Israel and Palestine. Zionism argues that Jews always have and always will be the rightful owners of the land, even if they've been gone for 2,000 years. So even though at the beginning of the 20th century, according to the Israeli historian Avi Schleim, Jews were a little less than or around 10% of the entire population of Palestine, Zionists claimed that every Jewish person that's ever existed always had a right to live there more than the people that have been living there for centuries. That is the argument. And they also claim that you have to accept that there is a right to having a Jewish state. That Jews have a right to a state, and you would be racist against Jews to not say that they have a right to have their own state defined as a Jewish state. Now keep in mind that this is not an argument that is a response to the real tragic, catastrophic Holocaust that happened in World War II. That's not where this argument stems from. Going back to Shlomo Avneri's argument, this goes back to the 19th century and the idea of this is a 19th century argument that they're trying to make us, that those who support this idea, they're taking a 19th century argument that they're trying to debate about in the 21st century. And what am I talking about? It's the idea that every nation or ethnic group has to have a state. Do they? Let's think about this. Does every ethnic group get to have a state? Is that even a good way to think of things? Keep in mind that in the 19th century, when you started seeing nationalism emerge everywhere, you had empires, imperial domains that were multicultural, and there were different ethnic groups and different language groups that were all kind of a part of a broader kingdom, monarchies, and so forth. And so then as nationalist movements occurred, different minorities and different other majorities started claiming that Germans belonged to Germany, Sweden is for Swedes, all these kind of arguments that have occurred. This belief, this idea is basically what led up to so many of the problems and the tragedies of World War II. Keeping in mind, Hitler saw that there were millions of Germans living in the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was only formed at the beginning of the 20th century, and here there's all of these German people there, and he's saying, well, no, then that's Germany. There's all these German people there. That's not fair. And there was discussions about Germans have a right to have more breathing space, more room. But it wasn't just Hitler that was arguing these things. This was a problem that was occurring in many other places. Greece expelled Turks. Turkey expelled Greeks. We can see in the 20th century this idea of these ethnic states and these ethno-states being the problem. So this idea sounds nice when we think about, or should I say nice in the sense of, when you say, oh, do Jews have a right to a state? We're being misled to what that implies. Okay? Because we are talking about a supremacist ideology, not just the right to exist. Now, let me make this clear. So, in the Middle East, there was other ideologies that were dealing with the same question of states and ethnicities. In Syria, there was a Christian named Michel Aflaq. He comes up with a political idea called Baathism, Pan-Arabism, and he wanted to make religion not be the focus of identity, but he said all Arabs have an identity. Now, what was the problem? In Iraq, when they embraced this, what did that mean for Kurds, or Assyrians as minorities, or Turkomans, to be in a regime that defined itself as Arab? Obviously, this leads to problems. Okay, right? And in this case, there was a lot of imposing of Arab culture on minority groups that didn't maybe necessarily originally want to be considered or never wanted to be considered Arab. So my point is, the idea of ethnic states is problematic no matter where we go. This is how many people feel. And so when we look at Israel saying we have a right to be defined as a Jewish state, what does that mean to non-Jews in the state? Why is that acceptable to have that arrangement there, but only there, right? This is okay. And just to bring this closer to home on the subject, there's an Israeli historian named Shlomo Zand, and he calls himself a post-Zionist, to be much more precise. He basically is saying Israel has a right to exist, that's true, but it should be an Israeli state, not a Jewish state. Now wait, think about this for a second. He points out, he said, you will never hear Israel called an Israeli state. Non-Jews can be citizens in Israel, but it's not a state for Israelis. If you're Palestinian Israeli and you're a full citizen, it's not your state. It's defined as a Jewish state. So if you're a Jewish person living in New York, in California, it's your state. But you, a full citizen in Israel, it's not your state. Shlomo Zand said that's ridiculous to have something like that. Everybody should be equal before the law. And that is the argument that anti-Zionists are talking about, which is that you can't have a political ideology, or we don't want to support an ideology that allows for one group to dominate over another. Okay? Simple as that. And so another example that I want to bring up is Bernie Sanders in this. So keep in mind that we're, those of us who are critical of Zionism and how that operates in Israel and the implications of that on the Palestinians. Many of us, I included, fully backed Bernie Sanders, hoping he would become the nominee of the Democratic Party to be potentially the president of the United States. All of us who were supporting Bernie Sanders knew that had he won, we would have helped bring about the first Jewish president of the United States. There were many, many Muslims, Palestinians, that were hoping to get him elected, knowing he was going to be the first Jewish president of the United States. Bernie Sanders always claimed to be a Zionist. In fact, he spent time on a kibbutz. He also would have been the only president that, if he would have been elected as president, he would have been the only president that spent time in Israel on a kibbutz on top of that. Now, why were so many Palestinians and other Muslims who are critical of the treatment that Palestinian gets by Israel, critical of Zionism, still want to vote for a Jewish man claiming to be a Zionist? It's because everyone knew that his platform at the time was still more progressive than any other American in the political parties that we were dealing with. He had far more nuance and actually addressed the Palestinians still as people. He criticized Netanyahu. This was far more than anybody else that was running for president was willing to do. So this anti-Zionist bloc of voters, I would say, I don't know if there's any studies or polls done on this, but in my circle and the people I knew were all still willing to vote for Bernie Sanders. Now, so this isn't some obsession with being anti-Jewish or hurting Jewish people. That's clear. We wanted this man to be president. Now we're very upset with him. Why are we upset with Bernie Sanders? Because he can't call for a ceasefire. He won't call for a ceasefire during this bloodbath. And so now we condemn him as we condemn Biden and all the US politicians that are facilitating this genocide against Palestinians. And it's for that reason, not because he's Jewish. So that's very clear. And that's just something that absolutely cannot be overlooked. And also, I think it should be thought of as quite strange and be understood that this is anti-Semitic, this ruling. And why do I say that? To say, can anybody imagine if you're an ethnic group where in the US government, you're told that your religious group or your ethnic group has a particular ideology that comes out of it, and you have to accept it, or you're a self-hating person, or you're racist, or those of you who are not this are racist against them. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, it's literally saying that Jewish people have to support Zionism. The world has to, the Americans have to support Zionism, or we're anti-Jewish and self-hating Jewish. How is it possible to make a demand on Jewish people that they have to embrace this idea? I mean, there's a lot of different ideologies that come out of the Jewish world. There's different branches of Judaism. Should we say if Jews aren't real, if they're not Orthodox, they're not real Jews? That's what some far-right rabbis say. Should we support a resolution on that? That Reform Jews that have a lesbian rabbi are not real Jews because they don't follow the strict traditional laws, like something like that. This is nonsense. That's anti-Semitism, imposing this on the whole entire Jewish world to accept this. And for those who actually care about America or value this idea of what it means to be an American, how could Congress demand that we accept an ideology that only specifically applies to another part of the world? Because part of the other reasons why even Palestinians were wanting to vote for Bernie Sanders is that Zionism only believes in discrimination in Israel. Bernie Sanders didn't believe in discrimination in America. So this is the strange thing about it. So, you can't be a full citizen in Israel under Zionism, but in America you can be. So, so just think about this ridiculousness of what is being argued for here. Okay, so now let's also talk about this committee going after anti-Semitism at universities, and some of the hearings there were pretty awkward. And if you watch some interactions, the one University of Pennsylvania president, when she was confronted if she could denounce genocide against Jews, if somebody called for a genocide of Jews, could she denounce it? And she couldn't seem to. She was acting as if, well, there depends on the context. It was very cringy and quite outrageous. But if you watch Democracy Now!, today's Democracy Now!, there's a discussion about what happened with this. And one of the men that was on Democracy Now! Was Omer Bartov. Now, who's this man? He is an Israeli-born scholar, and he teaches at Brown University, and he's a professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies. So his entire life work is extensively around topics of anti-Semitism, racism against Jews, anti-Semitism, the Nazi stuff, all those terrible things that have been taking place in the world to Jews and to even others. And so this is a man whose credibility on this topic is very solid. And what did he have to say about this presentation? He basically said, this is all just trying to make people not criticize Israel. And one of the things he points out with the hearing is, one, there were a lot of these university professors presidents that were making weak arguments. He wasn't really defending their position. But it was also in the context of being pressed with very dishonest questions. So the Republican Representative Elise Stefanik, she said, well, the word intifada means kill all the Jews. When the students shout that, are you supporting that? She mentioned that to one of the university presidents. Well, first of all, intifada doesn't mean kill all the Jews, so that's dishonest. But the university president didn't do her homework to actually respond to that properly, so there's that. He also pointed out that Stefanik wanted to say, well, when pro-Palestinians say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that this means death to the Jews and it's calling for genocide. What was his response to that? He said, well, that slogan means many different things to different people, and but it also means something in Israel. He points out that the Likud party under Netanyahu and many that's in his government, they say the same thing, and they really mean expelling all of the Palestinians. It's a racist statement by Israel itself. He points out that for Hamas, they call for getting rid of thinning out the Jewish population, and that's what that would mean to them. And that has its own set of problems. But for a good chunk of Palestinians that are saying it, that means what they say it means. They want to be free in all these places. And another scholar, by the way, he didn't mention this, claims that they were even saying that when Egypt and Jordan were occupying parts of Palestine. So it's not a specifically anti-Semitic issue. It's about the fact that they're not free. Okay? Keep in mind, Gaza is not a country. It's been under military siege and occupation for a long time. So here is this man, an Israeli himself, who's a scholar on all of these studies, and he points out the dishonesty of this committee and the way that these questions were being posed and how this was articulated. And so basically, what's my last point of thoughts to say on all this? What Congress is doing is a ruse to silence support for Palestinians. It is not to stop actual anti-Semitism, but to protect Israel's right to kill as many Palestinians as it wants and to take as much land as they want. I would argue that the committee that's doing this, our Congress, is using Jews as human shields to safeguard Israeli atrocities and nothing more. And so I think that history is going to show that they are definitely on the wrong side of it. The majority of people in the world, including many Jewish people, know that what's going on is not only awful and disgusting and outrageous, but it's also not sustainable. It's not acceptable. And more people will condemn this genocide and the actions of Israel. And the US government, as it doubles down in sending more weapons, as elites and institutions want to try to block this and silence us and intimidate and bully non-Jews and Jews alike that are trying to make a stand against this, what is going to be the end result? One cannot say, but clearly this needs to stop, and the lies and the propaganda are very clear to the majority of the world, and I hope that you, the viewer, are seeing that for yourself now.